The early morning sky over the western sea was completely obscured by thousands of dark black sails, stretching to the horizon like a dark storm approaching. The massive fleet of the Western Alliance, carrying over 100,000 soldiers and equipment, looming as it advanced into the shallow bay. The sound of horns and alarms from the coastal watchtowers rang out urgently, tearing through the peace of the dawn. On the stretching white sand dunes, the defending army of the port city quickly deployed for battle, thousands of long spears standing upright like a forest of sharp thorns, ready to intercept the enemy right at the water's edge. When the leading ships crashed straight into the sand, with the ear-piercing sound of wood impact, the slaughter began instantly. From the ship's deck, hundreds of gangplanks were lowered thunderously. The first Western soldiers in heavy armor threw themselves into the cold seawater, roaring wildly to drown out the sound of the waves. Immediately, they encountered a dense rain of arrows fired by the defending army. The sound of arrows thudding into wood, piercing through leather shields and tearing flesh rang out continuously. The first bodies fell flat, staining the white sea foam red. At the coastal defense line, blocks of infantry carrying large shields from the port city advanced simultaneously, forming a solid bronze wall blocking the wave of people rushing up from the sea. The two sides rushed into each other in a bloody melee right at the water's edge. The harsh sound of metal clashing, the sound of bones shattering under the blows of maces and battle axes mixed with screams of pain. The Western warriors, though impeded by the water, still frantically used shields to ram hard into the enemy ranks, trying to open a bloody path so their comrades behind had a place to step onto the mainland. Meanwhile, on the left flank of the beach, another squadron of warships recklessly rammed straight into the reef area to land faster. Hundreds of mercenaries wielding long axes jumped straight from the ship's gunwales onto the slippery rocks, ignoring the danger to ambush the flank of the defensive formation. Fresh blood splattered onto the gray rocks as they clashed with the border patrol of the defending side. There was no mercy whatsoever. Brutal slashes splitting helmets in two, severing limbs occurred continuously. The battle situation became extremely chaotic. Corpses piled up on top of each other, floating aimlessly with each wave washing ashore. Although suffering casualties of up to thousands in just the first hour, the overwhelming numbers of the Western Alliance gradually pushed the defending forces deep inland. The pristine white sand surface had now turned into a sticky crimson quagmire of blood and entrails. Finally, when the sun rose high above the head, the defending soldiers were forced to retreat towards the fortified city walls in the distance, leaving the beach strewn with bodies and shattered shipwrecks to the invaders. After completely capturing the coast, the Western coalition did not waste a single moment. For 3 whole days and nights, thousands of leather tents were erected close together, stretching along the white sandy shore like a giant mobile city. The sound of hammers driving stakes, the sound of iron being forged to repair weapons, and the shouting of orders echoed through the sky, drowning out the murmuring waves. Just as the dawn of the 4th day broke, the deep sound of war drums rang out simultaneously from 3 sides, signaling the official start of the first siege assault. Under the cover of large shields locked tightly together forming mobile domes, 50,000 heavy infantry rumbled towards the foot of the city wall. They carried hundreds of long joined wooden ladders and crude siege engines covered in wet raw animal hides to resist fire attacks. From the top of the city walls, over 20 meters high, the defenders coldly observed the dark torrent of people rushing in. When the enemy entered effective range, the sound of horns shrieked. Thousands of sharpened bamboo arrows poured down simultaneously from above like a rain shower, piercing through fragile wooden shields, pinning the leaders to the hard, dusty ground. Despite mounting casualties, the stream of people still frantically flooded to the foot of the stone wall. Dozens of ladders were erected simultaneously, iron hooks gripping tightly onto the moss-mottled wall. The Western soldiers held knives horizontally in their mouths, hands gripping the ladders climbing swiftly. But just as the first helmets emerged above the edge of the wall, large rough stones weighing hundreds of pounds were dropped freely by the defenders. The sound of bones shattering and miserable screams rang out continuously, as the stones crushed both people and ladders, dragging dozens of those climbing behind to fall to the ground, forming piles of mashed flesh at the foot of the wall. At the same time, at the fortified main gate cast in brass, a suicide squad of the attacking side was trying to push a large iron-capped tree trunk slamming hard into the door. The boom, boom at collision sound shook the entire watchtower, stone dust falling profusely. Responding to that frantic effort from the arch of the gate, cauldrons of boiling oil were poured by the city guards straight down onto the enemy's heads. The gruesome sizzling sound of flesh being cooked mixed with heart-rending screams. Next, hundreds of flaming torches were thrown down, turning the area in front of the city gate into a hellish sea of fire, burning both people and the gate-breaking vehicle in the blink of an eye. Faced with the overly fierce and resilient resistance of the defense system, the retreat bugle of the attacking side was forced to sound bitterly as the sun began to set. The tattered wave of people gradually retreated towards the coast, leaving behind piles of charred corpses, patches of oil, and broken ladders at the foot of the city wall. Proof of the inviolability of this legendary city on the first day of battle. After the disastrous failure of the first siege assault, the war situation quickly shifted to a prolonged stalemate on the vast, desolate plain, lying between the coast and the foot of the city wall. Throughout 9 long years, this place became a giant meat grinder swallowing the lives of both sides, without either side gaining a decisive victory. The ground, originally green with wild grass, was now churned up, bare of soil and rocks and flooded in bloody mud mixed with weapon fragments. On days when the sky was clear and calm, the two sides arrayed against each other on a scale of up to tens of thousands of people. The sound of horns and command signals rang out, tearing through the wind, opening the terrifying assault waves of the chariot force. From both sides, hundreds of two-wheeled war chariots, pulled by the strongest war horses, rushing into each other at dizzying speed like two opposing flash floods. Dust was kicked up blindly by horse hooves, obscuring even the sunlight. When those two floods collided, the sound of wood cracking, metal clashing, and horses neighing loudly in the sky created a chaotic symphony of death. Soldiers standing on the chariots tried to throw spears or slash down opponents before their own chariot was flipped over by a direct collision. Meanwhile, at the center of the battlefield, blocks of heavy infantry carrying round shields and long spears slowly advanced towards each other. There were no tricks, only muscle power and primal brutality. Two walls of shields crashed into each other, creating a thunderous, booming sound. Thousands of spear points simultaneously thrust through the gaps in the shields, seeking the soft flesh of the enemy. The soldiers in the front row fell down immediately, mercilessly trampled by their own comrades surging up from behind. Fresh blood flowed in streams, lubricating the ground, making standing firm a life-and-death challenge. On the left flank, the cavalry of the attacking side tried to execute a flanking maneuver, aiming to break the enemy formation. However, they encountered fierce resistance from a team of sharpshooters hiding behind high mounds. Volleys of arrows flew rattling like hail, piercing leather armor, pinning riders and horses to the ground. The wounded horses reared up in madness, throwing their masters down into the chaotic crowd, slaughtering each other below, creating a scene of extreme chaos. The battle lasted from sunrise until sunset. Neither side was willing to back down. Bodies piled up on each other, forming small mounds scattered throughout the plain. Only when darkness completely covered, the retreat trumpet sounded wearily. The survivors dragged their steps back to the camp, leaving behind thousands of dismembered corpses, waiting for vultures and wild dogs to come and scavenge in the cold night. Pitch-black night covered the entire massive camp of the Western Coalition, leaving only a few flickering fuzz from the dilapidated watchtowers. Taking advantage of the roaring ocean waves drowning out all noise, the narrow side gate on the southwest of the citadel quietly cracked open. A suicide squad of 500 elite soldiers equipped with light armor and short swords crawled out of the shadow of the city wall like ghosts. Their mission was not to conquer land, but to destroy the enemy's source of life. They moved crouching low close to the grass, wet with night dew, weaving through the flimsy wooden fences that the attacking army had neglected after years of fruitless siege. When reaching the outer perimeter of the camp, soft thwack-thwack sounds rang out. The dozing guards had their throats slit quickly before they could utter any alarm sound. The path to the food storage area and the ship anchorage was thrown open, when a piercing whistling signal rang out. 500 pine resin-soaked torches flared up simultaneously, tearing apart the quiet night. The suicide soldiers frantically threw hundreds of ceramic jars containing kerosene into tents storing dry food and straw. The fire met flammable materials and flared up violently, creating a wall of red-hot fire licking the entire night sky. The sound of crackling wood mixed with the panicked screams of tens of thousands of Western soldiers waking up in a nightmare. Many rushed out of their tents without a piece of armor to cover their bodies, being immediately cut down on the spot by the sharp swords of the raiders. Meanwhile, at the dock area near the water's edge, another attack prong was executing an even more daring action. They used axes to cut anchor ropes and set fire to the largest capital warships. The shipwood soaked in tar caught fire extremely fast, turning the giant ships into floating torches on the pitch-black water. The scorching heat caused the surrounding air to distort. The acrid smell of burning wood and roasted flesh permeated the space. The entire coalition camp fell into a state of extreme chaos. Western generals screamed hoarsely, trying to rally the troops, but thick black smoke and panic made orders impossible to transmit. The defenders took advantage of this disorder to cause maximum destruction, killing anyone blocking the way. However, when the attacking side's patrol cavalry force began to storm in from the flank, the retreat horn signal of the suicide squad sounded. They quickly retreated towards the shadow of the city wall, leaving behind a sea of fire lighting up a corner of the sky and hundreds of charred corpses, dealing a fatal blow to the morale and stomach of the invader. By the 10th year of the siege, the fertile plain before the city gates had completely deformed into a desolate dead land, bare with gravel and white bones. The air was heavy with the smell of death and despair covering both sides. The massive battles of tens of thousands of people with banners covering the sky were now just a distant memory. Instead, the war shifted to a phase of ruthless attrition, where death lurked in every breath, every rock crevice, every stagnant puddle. Military activity mainly took place underground, where the tunneling troops of the attacking side tried to dig deep into the city wall foundations. In the narrow, dark, and damp tunnels, sappers from both sides clashed in the most horrific battles. With no space to swing swords or spears, they rushed at each other with pickaxes, iron shovels, and even bare hands. Flickering torchlight illuminated mud-smeared faces distorted by hatred. The sound of skulls shattering under the blows of sledgehammers rang out harshly in the confined space. These tunnels frequently collapsed, burying alive hundreds of people from both sides in a common grave forever without sunlight. Above ground, skirmishes broke out sporadically but extremely violently around water sources and corpse collection areas. A patrol team of the attacking side, being too thirsty, recklessly approached the moat at the foot of the wall. Immediately from the arrow slits, the heavy crossbows of the defenders triggered. Short but powerful iron bolts tore through the wind rushing down, piercing through the rusted chest armor of the thirsty ones, pinning them tightly to the muddy swamp. The survivors fled in panic, leaving their comrades groaning, waiting for death under the harsh sun. In response, the stone throwers of the attacking side, though rotten in many parts after 10 years of rain and sun, still occasionally roared with dry sounds. Large stones wrapped in oil-soaked cloth burning flew across the gray sky, smashing into the city walls or falling into the residential area inside. Although no longer strong enough to break stone walls, they still caused small fires and crushed anyone unlucky enough to stand in the wrong place. The sound of crying echoing from within the city mixed with the wild, soulless laughter of the soldiers outside betting on where the next stone would fall. Both sides were exhausted physically and mentally. Food ran out, plague raged in the filthy camps. The soldiers looked at each other with dull eyes, hands still gripping weapons out of inertia, but in their hearts only waiting for an end, whether victory or death, to end this nightmare lasting a whole decade. Unable to accept being stuck forever in this dead land, the Western Coalition Command decided to pour all their capital into one final all-in gamble. As the cold light of dawn just shone down, the sound of the death battle horn rang out rumbling, prolonging endlessly like a soul-calling trumpet. The entire remaining troop strength, including wounded soldiers who could still hold weapons, gathered into a giant pitch-black square block. In front of them, 10 towering siege towers covered in wet buffalo hides loomed as they advanced towards the city wall like giant wooden monsters. The attack began with a frenzied bombardment never seen before. Thousands of stone throwers from the rear simultaneously poured down a rain of boulders and fire jars onto the city. The sky darkened due to the dense density of deadly flying objects. In response, from the soaring city walls, the defenders also unleashed everything they had hoarded over years. Flaming arrows, iron javelins, and hooks were launched down like a waterfall, pinning the first chargers to the dusty ground. At the main gate area, the pressure on the defense system reached its peak. A giant gate-breaking vehicle suspending a large oak trunk with a sharp iron-wrapped head was pushed forward by hundreds of burly soldiers. The sound boom-boom rang out earth-shakingly every time the iron head rammed hard into the brass gate, causing even the thick city wall to shake. The defending soldiers on the gate arch frantically poured down dozens of cauldrons of bubbling, boiling oil. Hot oil flowed through the gaps of the siege vehicle's roof, watering onto the flesh of those underneath, creating heart-rending, miserable screams mixed with the pungent smell of burning flesh. As it got closer to noon, the cruelty of the battle escalated beyond imagination. Because the space in front of the gate was too narrow and the attacking troop numbers were too high, the soldiers who fell had no place to fall. Corpses quickly piled up on each other, rising gradually into chaotic mounds. The rear waves of attackers were forced to climb over the very corpses of their comrades to reach the foot of the wall. Fresh blood flowed in small streams, mixing with dust to form a thick red mud layer, making every step slippery and heavy. The climax of the battle occurred when the defenders decided to sacrifice a part of the watchtower above the gate. They cut the support rope of a massive boulder used as a counterweight. The boulder, weighing tens of tons, fell freely straight down onto the gate-breaking vehicle below. A harsh explosion rang out, blinding dust rising high. The vehicle shattered into 100 pieces, completely crushing the army operating it. The hope of breaking the gate vanished into smoke. Faced with the desperate solidity of the city wall and casualties reaching tens of thousands in just one day, the retreat trumpet of the attacking side rang out in extreme resentment. The tattered stream of people retreated like a receding tide, leaving behind a horrific scene. Mountains of corpses towering high, leaning against the foot of the city wall, and the brass gate, though dented and scorched, remained tightly closed, standing majestic and imposing, challenging the entire sky. 3 days after the failed bloody general offensive, a strange and creepy silence covered the entire western coast, replacing the familiar war drums and shouting of the past decade. From the highest watchtowers, scouts of the defending side were amazed to see columns of pitch-black smoke rising profusely from the enemy camp. Not cooking smoke, but the smoke of destruction. The attacking side was burning down their own tents, wooden watchtowers, and bulky siege equipment that could not be taken away, turning the entire encampment area into a desolate sea of fire. Far out at sea, the fleet of thousands of warships simultaneously hoisted sails. Giant oars stirred the water, creating endless white foam trails. The invading army, after 10 years of helplessness before the fortified citadel, seemed to have accepted defeat and was retreating in droves towards the misty horizon, gradually disappearing behind distant limestone island ridges. The retreat took place orderly but hastily, leaving a battlefield strewn with ash and unburied corpses. However, amidst the ashes of the burnt camp, a giant bizarre object stood tall, lonely in the vast white sand. It was a great wooden structure, assembled from planks of shipwrecks and old forest wood, hewn into the shape of a giant war beast over 15 meters high. It stood there, silent and mysterious, forelegs raised high as if rearing up, wearing withered wreaths on its neck as a religious offering to ask the sea god for blessing on the return voyage. Meanwhile, at the city gate, suspicion covered the defending generals. A scout cavalry team was sent out to reconnoiter the situation. The sound of horse hooves clacking on the scorched ground as they cautiously approached the wooden monster. There were no ambush soldiers, no traps, only the sound of sea wind whistling through the gaps of rough wood grains, creating creepy howling sounds. Beside the foot of the wooden statue, they found a stone slab carved with lines of apology to the guardian gods of this land, affirming this was the final offering of atonement before leaving forever. News of the enemy's retreat spread like wildfire within the city. The tension suppressed for 10 long years suddenly burst. The defending soldiers, accustomed to gripping spear shafts even while sleeping, now tremblingly dropped their weapons, daring not believe their eyes. The heavy brass gate, always tightly closed against every assault, slowly groaned open. Tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers flooded the beach, surrounding the giant wooden machine, curiously touching the rough wooden shell while cheering in the frantic joy of the victors, unaware that they were standing before their own death sentence. Blinded by the frantic joy of victory after 10 years of suffering, the anxious warnings of a few veteran generals were quickly drowned out by the cheers of the agitated crowd. The decision to bring the giant wooden machine into the inner city as a trophy offered to the gods was passed with insane unanimity. However, the height and width of the wooden beast exceeded the dimensions of the main gate arch. Without a moment of hesitation, the order to destroy part of the wall surrounding the gate was issued, an act of self-destruction of the defense system that the enemy outside had been powerless to do for a decade. Hundreds of stonemasons and soldiers rushed to the city gate area with sledgehammers and crowbars. The sound of metal hitting stone, clack, clack, rang out piercingly, stone dust flying blindly. Solid stone blocks, once soaked in the blood of so many sieges, were now pried out by their own masters, pushed to the ground and shattered. A large gap quickly appeared, revealing a gaping wound on the body of the inviolable citadel. To move the wooden block weighing hundreds of tons, they had to lay thousands of round tree trunks on the road as rollers. Thousands of woven ropes as thick as wrists were tied tightly to the neck and legs of the machine. To the urging beat of drums, tens of thousands of people, including soldiers and civilians, together strained to pull. The sound of wood grinding terrifyingly, the sound of wheels crushing the paving stones rang out, thundering like thunder, as the monster loomed crawling over the rubble of the newly destroyed wall, entering the large central square. As soon as the machine was seated in the middle of the city, a grand victory celebration party unprecedented exploded. Wine cellars sealed for 10 years were thrown open. Red wine flowed like streams through the streets. Bonfires were lit brightly in every corner, clearly illuminating faces red from drunkenness and extreme excitement. Soldiers discarded helmets, swords, and spears lying scattered, mixed in piles of food bones. They hugged each other, dancing, singing wild, triumphal songs around the feet of the giant wooden machine, mocking the cowardice of the enemy who had fled. No one remembered to assign guards on the watchtowers or repair the hole at the city gate. Vigilance, their sharpest weapon, had completely vanished in the alcohol. When the night was late, the singing gradually died down, replaced by the heavy snoring of tens of thousands of drunk people lying scattered everywhere. From the temple steps to the drainage ditches, the whole citadel fell into a deep sleep, unaware that death was hiding right inside the belly of the trophy they had just struggled to pull home, coldly waiting for the moment to strike. In the quietest hour of the dark night, when the pale silver moonlight was swallowed by thick black clouds, a large wooden section on the left flank of the beast moved slightly and then slid gently to one side. From the dark and cramped belly compartment, a rope ladder was dropped down to the deserted square. 30 black shadows, the most elite warriors carefully selected, silently crawled out. They clung to the rope, sliding down to the ground as gently as wildcats, hands clutching short daggers blackened to avoid reflecting light. The Special Forces group moved extremely but in the dark, skirting along the long shadows of large buildings to approach the city gate area. Here, the scene of debauchery appeared clearly. A dozen guards lying sprawled on piles of rubble, Dead drunk, oblivious to the world, weapons thrown carelessly out of reach. Without a word of warning, the assassin group rushed into action. Sharp blades swung up and came down decisively. The sound of steel blades cutting through throats rang out with gruesome snicked sounds, followed by the choking gurgle of fresh blood gushing from windpipes. The guards died right in their drunkenness, eyes still staring wide but souls having left their bodies. After clearing the obstacles, a group split off to climb the highest remaining watchtower near the gate. A large pine resin-soaked torch was lit, then swung in a circle 3 times against the pitch-black night sky. That was the signal of death. Far out at sea in the murky night, thousands of small fire spots from the warship fleet, which had secretly returned and anchored near the shore, flared up simultaneously in response. The enemy had not left at all. They just hid in the darkness waiting for this moment. Below the city gate, the remaining Special Forces group exerted full force to push the heavy brass gate wide open. The sound of dry hinges screeching loudly in the empty night, but now no one was sober enough to hear it anymore. The door opened fully, exposing the fatal wound of the citadel to the vast ocean. Cold sea wind rushed in, carrying the salty smell and murderous aura of tens of thousands of soldiers silently landing on the sand. The Special Forces soldiers did not stop there. They spread out in all directions, cutting alarm bell ropes, locking the doors of the sleeping barracks tight with wooden bars from the outside, and scattering iron caltrops all over the roads leading to the main gate. All preparations for a bloodbath were complete. The fortified citadel, which had stood firm against storms and 10,000 troops for 10 years, now lay naked and helpless, waiting for the scythe of death swinging right at the doorstep. The darkness outside the crumbled city wall suddenly turned into a living flood of steel. Tens of thousands of attacking soldiers, those who had just landed from warships, rushed into the city through the large hole at the main gate like water bursting a dam. The sound of heavy footsteps shaking the ground, mixed with wild battle screams tearing apart the quiet night. The port city's worst nightmare had become reality right in the deepest sleep of its residents. As soon as they flooded the main streets, the attacking troops immediately spread out into all narrow alleys like flowing hot lava. They did not need to distinguish targets. Every closed wooden door of private homes was kicked open mercilessly. Bloody swords swung up in the flickering torchlight, slashing down on bodies drowsy in bed. Horrified screams, children crying, and desperate begging rang out chaotically, creating a symphony of hell on earth. Fresh blood splattered on plaster walls, staining silk curtains red, and flowed out the doorstep like small streams. Meanwhile, at the soldier concentration camps, the situation was even more tragic. The defending soldiers woke up in drunkenness, limbs weak and fumbling for weapons in the dark, but only touching the sharp spear points of the enemy waiting ready. Trapped tight in barracks starting to blaze from fire thrown from outside, they crowded the narrow exit, trampling each other to escape, only to become targets for rain of arrows from crossbowmen surrounding them as soon as they rushed out. The pungent smell of burning flesh rose, mixing with black smoke suffocating the whole sky. Not stopping at the massacre, the invading army began to systematically set fire to destroy the city. Thousands of torches were thrown onto thatched roofs and old dry wood. The sea wind blowing hard from the bay caused the fire to spread at dizzying speed, dancing from house to house, turning a prosperous metropolis into a giant crematorium lighting up a corner of the night sky. The bright red firelight illuminated the chaotic scene in the streets. Panicked citizens running aimlessly, collapsing under the hooves of pursuing cavalry, bodies lying piled up, blocking the way of both the living and the dead. At a major intersection leading to the upper citadel, a rare group of defending remnants who were still sober tried to regroup to resist. They formed a desperate circle, backs to each other, holding anything that could fight, from carrying poles to fragments of torn shields. However, that weak resistance effort was quickly extinguished by the absolute superiority in numbers and equipment of the opponent. A charge of the attacking side's round shield infantry quickly crushed the fragile formation. turning the last place of resistance on the street into a pile of mashed flesh under hobnailed boots. The torrent of invading troops continued to flow towards the high hill, where the magnificent royal palace was still lit, the final target of this bloody night. The magnificent royal palace, situated high on the top of the hill, once considered the immortal heart of the kingdom, has now become the final oasis of despair amidst a vast sea of fire. The light from the burning city below reflected upwards, dyeing the stark white marble walls red like the color of blood. At the foot of the main staircase leading to the great hall, thousands of attacking soldiers crowded together like ants, screaming wildly, trying to overcome 1,000 stone steps to touch the ultimate treasure. Here, 500 royal guards in shining golden armor had arrayed in an immovable steel wall. They were the most elite warriors sworn to protect the king and the final honor of the dynasty with their lives. The battle on the steps took place more brutally than anywhere else. Due to the steep and narrow terrain, the attacking force could not use their overwhelming numbers immediately. The long spears of the guards from above thrust down with extreme force, piercing through shields and chest armor of those trying to climb up. Bodies of the invaders rolled tumbling down the steps, sweeping away those behind them to fall, creating bloody, chaotic piles right on the royal walkway. However, that brave resistance could not withstand fate. From both wings of the palace, mountaineering teams of the attacking side used iron hooks and ropes to climb up the soaring balconies. They shattered the brilliant-colored glass windows, flooding inside like a deluge, attacking the rear of the defending guard team. Caught in a pincer movement, the defensive formation crumbled. The sound of swords and spears clashing rang out in the long, deep corridors. Battle cries mixed with the clatter of precious ceramic vases being smashed. Fresh blood splattered onto priceless frescoes and luxurious gold-threaded carpets. The great door of the throne hall, exquisitely carved in ebony and ivory, finally collapsed under the brutal blows of dozens of heavy battle axes. The invaders rushed in like a pack of hungry wolves. Here, the last courtiers and the old king himself were mercilessly slaughtered right at the foot of the throne. Brutal swords slashed the symbols of power, ripping pearl necklaces and gem-encrusted crowns, throwing them rolling on the blood-flooded floor. When the first weak rays of the new day pierced through the thick black smoke, the legendary citadel had completely collapsed. The victorious army began to set fire to the royal palace area. The fire rose high, consuming ancient scrolls, treasures of knowledge and art accumulated for hundreds of years. The giant dome of the palace collapsed with a loud explosion, blowing up a huge column of ash flying up to the blue sky. Viewed from far offshore, the entire citadel was now just a desolate pile of ashes, ending the existence of a brilliant civilization that once dominated the Great Sea.